3 aircraft, 6 men, one mission that would change everything. I still remember the smell of coffee in the briefing room that morning, stale and bitter, just like the news we were about to receive. "Gentlemen, this is strictly classified," the colonel said, his face grim as the satellite images appeared on screen. "Russian air defense systems being moved to positions that threaten our allies. Your job is to gather visual confirmation without being detected." Simple words that carried impossible weight. My stomach tightened as I looked at my wingmen, Thompson and Rodriguez, both family men like me. We'd flown countless missions together, but something about this one felt different. The intel officer pointed to narrow mountain valleys we'd need to navigate, the only approach that might keep you off their radar. Might. That word hung in the air between us. We studied the terrain maps carefully, memorizing every ridge and valley that could provide cover from enemy radar. "Stay below 500 feet. Maintain radio silence once you cross this line," the colonel continued, dragging his finger across the map. I nodded, feeling the familiar pre-mission tension building in my shoulders. We'd be flying our F-15E Strike Eagles. Not the stealthiest aircraft, but reliable workhorses with the cameras and sensors we needed. As we went through contingency plans, I found myself looking at the photos on the colonel's desk, his kids in baseball uniforms, a family vacation. Just like the pictures I kept in my locker. "If you're compromised," he said, his voice pulling me back, "abort immediately. This is reconnaissance only. We are not at war." Not yet, I thought silently. That's why we were going, to prevent one. The weather briefing came next. Conditions that would make flying treacherous even without the threat of enemy fire. Low clouds, possible thunderstorms, temperatures near freezing at our flight altitude. Perfect for staying hidden, terrible for actually flying. I made notes about potential icing conditions at certain altitudes, trying to push away thoughts of my own daughter's birthday coming up next week. "Wheels up at 0400, the colonel concluded. "Any questions?" There were dozens, of course, but none we could voice. This was the job. Thompson caught my eye and gave a slight nod, our usual pre-mission acknowledgement. Rodriguez was quieter than usual, methodically organizing his flight plans. We'd been a team for 3 years, could practically read each other's minds in the cockpit. That connection had saved our lives more than once. After the briefing, I stepped outside for a moment alone, watching the sunset paint the airfield in gold. Other pilots walked past, laughing about weekend plans, blissfully unaware of what morning would bring. I checked my watch. Time to call home before communications blackout. My wife answered on the third ring. "Hey, it's me," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Just checking in." She knew what that meant, that I wouldn't be calling tomorrow, that I was heading somewhere I couldn't talk about. "Stay safe," she said simply. I promised I would, the same promise I'd made before every mission. But as I hung up, the weight of tomorrow's operation settled firmly on my shoulders. None of us could have known, then, that only one of us would return from those mountains, or how the events about to unfold would haunt me for years to come. 4 a.m. came brutally early, the darkness still complete as I performed my pre-flight checks. The tarmac was wet from overnight rain, reflecting the runway lights in long, blurred streaks. I ran my hand along the smooth metal skin of my aircraft, a ritual I'd maintained since flight school. The ground crew worked silently, professionals who understood the gravity of pre-dawn departures. "She's all set, Captain," my crew chief said, handing me the final checklist. I nodded my thanks, unable to shake the heaviness that had settled in my chest since the briefing. Through the darkness, I could see Thompson and Rodriguez doing their own walkarounds, their breath visible in the cold morning air. Just another mission, I told myself. We'd be back for dinner, swapping stories in the officers' club. The cockpit embraced me like an old friend, familiar switches, dials, and screens glowing softly in the darkness. I settled into my seat, connecting oxygen and communications lines, running through the startup sequence I could perform in my sleep. Outside my canopy, the world was still except for the ground crew and our 3 aircraft. "Strike 1-1, systems check," I said into my mask, beginning our pre-takeoff communications. "Strike 1-2, systems green," Thompson responded. "Strike 1-3, All systems operational, Rodriguez confirmed. We were a well-oiled machine, each of us knowing exactly what the others would do before they did it. The engines came to life with a whine that built to a confident roar, vibrating through the airframe and into my bones. There's nothing quite like that feeling, tons of metal and fuel about to defy gravity under your control. We taxied in formation, our landing lights cutting through the pre-dawn mist. The control tower gave us priority clearance, another sign of our mission's importance. Strike flight. You are cleared for immediate takeoff. Winds 305 at 6 knots. I acknowledged, advancing my throttles smoothly. The acceleration pushed me back into my seat as the runway lights blurred, then fell away beneath us. The darkness swallowed us as we climbed, the scattered lights of the base diminishing until they were just another cluster of stars below. We established our formation with practiced precision, Thompson slightly behind and to my right, Rodriguez mirroring him on the left. The first hints of dawn were just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon as we turned toward our objective. Below us, the world was still asleep, unaware of 3 aircraft slipping through the night on a mission that wasn't supposed to exist. As we crossed into international airspace, I switched our communications to secure channels. Strike flight, comm check, I transmitted. Both wingmen responded clearly, but there was tension audible in their voices now. We all knew we were crossing a line that mattered. The flight plan would take us over the ocean for the next 2 hours, skirting carefully around certain territories, maintaining altitude that would keep us off most long-range radars. The sun began to rise off our right wing, painting the scattered clouds below in pink and gold. It was beautiful in a way that seemed at odds with our purpose. I checked our fuel consumption, navigation systems, and the specialized reconnaissance equipment we'd been briefed on. Everything was functioning perfectly. Too perfectly, perhaps. In my experience, missions that started this smoothly rarely ended the same way. 20 minutes to descent point, I advised my wingmen. Final equipment checks now. It was the last routine communication we would have before everything changed, before the quiet dawn erupted into chaos that would leave 2 planes down and 6 families shattered. I couldn't have known then that the next time I'd see this particular sunrise, I'd be alone, hunted, and fighting not for mission success, but for survival itself. The first indication of trouble wasn't dramatic, just a slight anomaly on my threat warning receiver. Strike flight, I'm picking up intermittent radar sweeps at our 2 o'clock. I transmitted quietly, eyes scanning the mountainous terrain ahead. We were flying so low that treetops occasionally seemed close enough to touch, our aircraft hugging the contours of valleys and ridgelines. Confirm 1-1. Got the same here, Thompson replied, his voice steady. Could be weather radar. But we all knew better. Our intelligence had clearly underestimated the enemy's detection capabilities in this region. I made a split-second decision, leading our formation even lower, practically skimming the terrain. The turbulence increased violently, throwing us around in our cockpits as we fought to maintain position. The beautiful sunrise that had accompanied our approach now seemed like a cruel joke, illuminating us for anyone looking in our direction. 2 bogeys, fast movers at our 6 o'clock high. Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio with urgency I'd never heard from him before. My head snapped around, searching the sky behind us. There they were, the unmistakable silhouettes of Su-35s, Russia's premier air superiority fighters, descending toward our position with alarming speed. Strike flight, maintain course and speed. Do not engage, I ordered, fighting to keep my voice level. We weren't here to start a war. We still had a chance to complete our reconnaissance and get out if we could stay undetected just a little longer. I reduced power slightly, hoping the sound of our engines would be masked by the mountains. The enemy fighters continued their approach, but their pattern suggested they hadn't locked onto us yet. They were searching, not pursuing. 4 or 5 agonizing minutes. We continued our low-level ingress, every muscle in my body tense, as I divided my attention between flying feet above jagged terrain and monitoring the threat behind us. Then Rodriguez's voice again, this time with unmistakable alarm. Sam's sight active. About missile launch warning. My heart slammed against my ribs as I instantly rolled my aircraft and deployed countermeasures. Evade! Evade! Strike flight break formation now. The peaceful morning erupted into chaos as our 3 aircraft diverged in different directions, engines screaming at maximum power. The sudden roar of my afterburner echoed off the valley walls as I pulled into a climbing turn, watching in horror as the first missile streaked toward Thompson's aircraft. He executed a perfect defensive maneuver, the missile exploding harmlessly behind him. But where there was one missile, there would be more. And now the enemy fighters would have heard our engines at full power. "They're everywhere," Thompson shouted, his usual calm completely gone. My radar was lighting up with new contacts, not just the 2 fighters we'd spotted, but 4 more joining from the north, along with multiple ground-based tracking radars. We'd flown directly into an ambush. They'd known we were coming. "Strike flight, abort mission. I repeat, abort mission." I transmitted, simultaneously diving back toward the valley floor to break radar lock. The irony wasn't lost on me. We'd come to gather intelligence on their air defenses, and now those very systems were trying to kill us. As I leveled off, hugging the terrain, I caught a glimpse of Rodriguez taking evasive action against an enemy fighter that had closed to within visual range. Thompson was somewhere behind me, also engaged. What had started as a simple reconnaissance mission had deteriorated into a desperate fight for survival against overwhelming odds. And the worst was yet to come, as the rising sun glinted off another salvo of missiles launching from the mountainside ahead. In that moment, I realized with crystal clarity that completing the mission was no longer the priority. Getting my men home alive was all that mattered now. "Fox 2, I shouted instinctively as I released a Sidewinder missile toward the nearest enemy fighter, watching it track perfectly before detonating in a flash of orange and black. No time for celebration, though. 2 more bogeys were closing fast on my 6. I slammed the stick hard left, then right, feeling the G-forces crush me into my seat as sweat poured down my face beneath my oxygen mask. 1-2 break right now, I called to Thompson, watching in horror as an enemy missile tracked toward his exhaust. He rolled just in time, the missile missing by mere feet, close enough that the explosion rocked his aircraft violently. "Thanks, lead," he gasped, recovering his flight path. But Rodriguez was in trouble. 3 enemy fighters had singled him out, coordinating their attack with frightening precision. 1-3, dive for the deck. "Use the terrain," I called, already pulling my aircraft around to help him. The next few minutes were a blur of violent maneuvers, missile warnings, and the continuous thunder of our cannons. My world narrowed to the cockpit displays, the enemy positions, and a desperate need to protect my wingmen. "I'm hit. I'm hit." Thompson's voice suddenly crackled through my headset, followed by a string of damage reports. My blood ran cold as I spotted his aircraft trailing smoke, still flying but clearly wounded. "Can you maintain control?" I asked, already knowing we were too far from friendly territory for him to make it back. "Affirmative, but losing hydraulic pressure," he responded, his voice strained but professional. 1-3 status? I called to Rodriguez. The radio remained silent for 3 excruciating seconds before his voice came through, breathless. "Still here, boss. But they got me boxed in. Don't think I can't." His transmission cut off as his aircraft disappeared behind a ridgeline, pursuing an enemy fighter at dangerously low altitude. What happened next will haunt me until my dying day. Thompson's damaged aircraft suddenly erupted in flames as a second missile found its mark. "Ejecting" was his final transmission before his F-15 exploded, the fireball reflecting off the snow-covered mountains. I screamed his name into the radio, watching for a parachute, but the enemy fighters were already circling the crash site like vultures. No chance of survival. My grief instantly transformed into white-hot rage as I turned toward Rodriguez's last position, pushing my aircraft beyond its limits. I crested the ridge just in time to see his plane taking direct hits from ground fire, spiraling toward the valley floor in a terminal dive. No ejection. No chance. In the space of 60 seconds, I'd lost both my wingmen, my brothers. And I was alone, 600 miles from friendly airspace, with 4 enemy fighters still hunting me and fuel levels dropping into the red zone. Something changed inside me in that moment. A cold, calculating clarity replacing the emotional chaos. These bastards had taken my friends, and now they wanted me too. I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I cut power, dropping my aircraft into a narrow canyon where radar couldn't track me effectively. Years of training took over as I formulated a plan that seemed impossible even as I executed it. If I couldn't outrun them or outgun them, I'd have to outsmart them. I activated all remaining countermeasures simultaneously, creating a confused electronic signature, then shut down non-essential systems to reduce my heat signature. As I navigated through the twisting canyon at speeds that left no room for error, a new determination settled over me. I would survive this. I would make it home, not just for myself, but to ensure Thompson and Rodriguez didn't die for nothing. Their sacrifice would have meaning. I would complete the mission and bring back the intelligence we'd come for. With enemy fighters still searching overhead, I activated our reconnaissance systems and began methodically documenting every enemy position I could identify. If I was going to die out here, I'd make damn sure I took their secrets with me. Fuel warning alarms blared in my cockpit as I pushed my crippled aircraft to its limits. One engine was running hot after taking shrapnel from an exploding missile, and my right wing had visible damage that made the aircraft pull constantly to one side. I'd managed to shake the enemy fighters temporarily by diving into cloud cover and shutting down all non-essential systems to minimize my radar signature. But I knew they were still searching, coordinating with ground units to establish a kill box around me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The reconnaissance mission that was supposed to map their air defense network was now giving me a first-hand experience of exactly how effective that network was. Through breaks in the clouds, I could see military vehicles converging on the areas where Thompson and Rodriguez had gone down. No rescue would be coming for them. Or for me. I was on my own, over 500 miles from the nearest friendly airbase, with barely enough fuel to cover half that distance. Mayday, mayday, mayday. I transmitted on the emergency frequency, knowing it was probably futile at this range. Strike 1-1 declaring emergency. Aircraft damaged, fuel critical. Request vector for nearest emergency landing site. Static was my only answer. I switched frequencies several times, trying different encryption protocols, but the mountains were blocking any chance of long-range communication. The realization settled over me like ice water. No one knew I was still alive, and no one was coming to help. I pulled out my survival map, tracing possible routes with a shaking finger while simultaneously scanning for threats. There was a small, abandoned airstrip about 200 miles south that had been used for humanitarian aid drops years earlier. If I could reach it, I might be able to set down before running out of fuel. It would mean flying through another 30 minutes of hostile airspace, but staying here wasn't an option. I banked my aircraft southward, staying in the clouds whenever possible and using valleys for cover when the cloud ceiling dropped too low. Every minute felt like an hour. Every unfamiliar sound from the damaged engine sending spikes of adrenaline through my system. The faces of Thompson and Rodriguez kept flashing in my mind, their families waiting for them at home, not knowing yet that they would never return. I pushed those thoughts away. Focus. Survive. Complete the mission. That's what they would want. Through a gap in the clouds, I spotted a convoy of military vehicles on a mountain road below, unmistakably heading toward the crash sites. Acting on instinct and anger, I dropped altitude, lined up the convoy in my gun sight, and squeezed the trigger. My 20mm cannon roared to life, tearing into the vehicles before they could react. It wasn't part of the mission, but it felt like justice for my fallen brothers. I pulled up hard, knowing I'd just made myself a target again, but unable to regret the decision. The retaliation was swift and ferocious. Within minutes, new radar locks appeared on my warning receiver. They called in reinforcements, helicopter gunships, rising from concealed positions in the valleys ahead. My fuel situation was beyond critical now, the gauge showing empty running on reserves that would give me perhaps 10 more minutes of flight time. I had to make a decision: try to reach the abandoned airstrip, now surely watched by enemy forces, or find somewhere, anywhere, to put the aircraft down and attempt to evade on foot. The survival training we'd gone through flashed through my mind. The harsh statistics about pilot recovery from hostile territory, the stories of those who'd made it and those who hadn't. As I weighed my rapidly diminishing options, a new alarm sounded: missile lock from directly ahead. I had no warning, no time to deploy countermeasures. The missile appeared through the clouds like a streak of malevolent lightning, heading straight for my aircraft. In that split second, as death rushed toward me at supersonic speed, time seemed to slow down. I thought of my wife, my daughter, the promise I'd made to come home. And then I did the only thing I could. I rolled the aircraft inverted and pulled with every ounce of strength I possessed, diving toward the valley floor in a maneuver that no sane pilot would attempt. The missile detonated somewhere above me, close enough that shrapnel peppered my canopy like deadly hail. But I was still flying, still fighting, still determined to make it home with the intelligence that had cost the lives of my best friends. What happened next would test the limits of both aircraft and pilot in ways I couldn't have imagined. The landing, if you could call it that, was a control crash at best. With both engines flamed out from fuel starvation, I'd managed to guide my dead-stick aircraft onto a relatively flat section of valley, the landing gear still tucked safely in the fuselage to avoid catching on the rough terrain. The impact was violent, knocking me nearly unconscious despite my harness. For several minutes, I just sat there, blood trickling from a gash on my forehead, taking inventory of my body. Arms moved, legs moved. Nothing felt broken, though everything hurt. The cockpit was eerily silent after hours of engine noise and alarms. Through my cracked canopy, I could see smoke rising from the mountains where Thompson had gone down, and in the distance, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the valley. They were hunting me, and they were getting closer. With shaking hands, I gathered my survival kit, sidearm, and the most crucial item, the data module containing all the reconnaissance information we'd collected, including the footage of my wingmen being shot down. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about bringing home evidence of what had happened here. The temperature outside was well below freezing, the wind cutting through my flight suit like knives. I had to make a decision: stay with the aircraft and hope for rescue, or abandon it and try to evade capture on foot. The decision was made for me as the helicopter's sounds grew louder, now accompanied by the rumble of ground vehicles. I ran, stumbling through knee-deep snow toward a forested area about half a mile away. Each breath sent clouds of vapor into the air, and my legs burned with the effort of high-stepping through the snow. Twice I fell, the second time sliding down a small embankment and nearly losing my survival pack. But the fear of capture drove me forward. I'd heard the stories of what happened to pilots captured in this region. None of them ended well. The forest provided some cover, and I paused there, catching my breath while formulating a plan. The border was roughly 200 miles southwest, an impossible distance on foot in this terrain. But there was a small village about 20 miles south that might have transportation I could appropriate. For 3 days, I moved only at night, navigating by stars and the small compass in my survival kit. During daylight hours, I found whatever cover I could: caves, dense thickets, once even burying myself in snow as a search party passed within 50 feet of my position. The cold was my constant enemy, seeping into my bones until I couldn't stop shivering. My emergency rations dwindled quickly, despite rationing them to the point of constant hunger. On the second night, a storm moved in, bringing heavy snow that both concealed my tracks and threatened to freeze me to death. I kept moving, knowing that stopping meant dying. The faces of Thompson and Rodriguez stayed with me, sometimes so vividly that I caught myself talking to them. Just a little further, I'd mutter through cracked lips: "We're almost there, boys." They'd become my invisible companions, their memory driving me forward when my body begged to surrender to the cold and exhaustion. On the fourth day, delirious from hunger and cold, I crested a ridge and spotted the village in the valley below. Smoke rose from chimneys, and I could make out people moving about, civilians, not military. Hope surged through me for the first time since the crash. I waited until nightfall, then approached cautiously, staying in the shadows. The village was poor, just a dozen or so houses clustered around a central well. On its outskirts sat what I'd been praying for, a garage with several vehicles inside. I watched for hours, learning the patterns of movement, identifying which houses were occupied and which weren't. Around midnight, I made my move, slipping down to the garage and examining the vehicles. An ancient truck with a partially full gas tank became my salvation. Hot wiring, it was a skill I never thought I'd need, but desperation is an excellent teacher. As the engine coughed to life, I heard shouting. I'd been spotted. There was no time for stealth now. I slammed the truck into gear and accelerated out of the village, headlights off, navigating by moonlight as gunshots rang out behind me. I was back in the game, moving toward the border with renewed determination, though I knew the hardest part of my journey was still ahead. The enemy would be looking for the truck, and the border crossing would be heavily guarded. But for the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe that I might actually make it home, that Thompson and Rodriguez wouldn't have died in vain. The truck ran out of gas about 15 miles from the border, sputtering to a stop in the pre-dawn darkness. I pushed it as far as it would go, taking back roads and animal trails whenever possible to avoid checkpoints. Now I was on foot again, each step a battle against exhaustion and the elements. My body was functioning on pure willpower. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours, and my water had run out the previous day. The data module felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my pocket, though in reality, it was lighter than a cell phone. It contained everything: the evidence of our mission, the footage of my wingmen being shot down, and the intelligence we'd been sent to gather. More importantly, it contained proof of the ambush, proof that we'd been deliberately lured into a trap by someone who knew our flight path in advance. There were implications there that I couldn't fully process in my current state, but I knew the data had to reach our intelligence officers, whatever the cost. The border itself was an invisible line, but the security around it was very real. I spent the day observing from a concealed position on a ridgeline, watching the patterns of the border guards through the small binoculars from my survival kit. 2 guard towers, regularly spaced patrols with dogs, and a fence topped with barbed wire. In my condition, climbing that fence would be nearly impossible. I need another way. As dusk fell, I noticed a supply truck approaching the checkpoint from the enemy side. It was thoroughly searched, then allowed to pass through a gate in the fence. My fatigued mind began formulating a desperate plan. If I could somehow get on that truck during its inspection, I might be able to ride it across the border. It was a long shot, but every option available to me was a long shot at this point. I worked my way down from the ridge, using the growing darkness as cover, and positioned myself in a drainage ditch near the checkpoint. Now, it was a waiting game, waiting for the next truck, waiting for a moment of distraction, waiting for my one chance at freedom. Around midnight, headlights appeared in the distance. Another supply truck approaching from the enemy side. I tensed, ready to move. The truck stopped at the checkpoint, and border guards began their inspection, opening the back doors and climbing inside with flashlights. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. While the guards were focused on the cargo area, I crawled from my hiding place and slipped underneath the truck, finding a precarious handhold on the chassis. Every muscle screamed in protest as I pulled myself up, pressing my body against the undercarriage. The cold metal against my face was almost a relief after days of exposure to the elements. I heard voices above me, the guards finishing their inspection. The doors slammed shut, and the engine rumbled to life. For a terrifying moment, I thought one of the guards might do a final check underneath the vehicle, but the truck began to move, rolling slowly through the gate and across the border. I clung to the underside, barely breathing, feeling every bump and pothole as a potential disaster that might dislodge me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the truck picked up speed, indicating we were well past the checkpoint. I needed to drop now, before we got too far on a main road where my fall might be noticed. With the last of my strength, I released my grip and let myself roll onto the pavement, the impact knocking what little breath I had from my lungs. Pain shot through my shoulder as I tumbled into a ditch beside the road. I lay there, gasping, as the truck's taillights disappeared around a curve. I'd done it. I was across the border. But I wasn't safe yet. I was still in hostile territory, just a different kind. I forced myself to my feet and oriented myself using the stars. The nearest friendly outpost was about 10 miles southwest, according to my mental map. 10 miles in my condition might as well have been 100, but I started walking anyway, one painful step at a time. Each step took me closer to home, closer to fulfilling my promise to Thompson and Rodriguez that their sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. As dawn broke over the mountains behind me, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. I'd survived the impossible so far. I could survive a little more. What I didn't know then was that the most difficult part of my journey wasn't physical at all. It was the reception that awaited me when I finally made it back to friendly forces with my explosive cargo of data and accusations. The military hospital bed felt impossibly soft after a week of sleeping on frozen ground. I've been picked up by a Border Patrol unit after stumbling into their checkpoint, more dead than alive. My body was a collection of injuries: frostbite on my toes and fingers, malnutrition, dehydration, a dislocated shoulder from my fall from the truck, and a collection of cuts and bruises that made every movement painful. But I was alive, which was more than could be said for Thompson and Rodriguez. The data module had been taken from me immediately upon my return, whisked away by stern-faced intelligence officers who asked preliminary questions about the mission but seemed more interested in the electronic evidence than my personal account. That should have been my first warning that something wasn't right. Now, 3 days later, a new group of officers had arrived, higher-ranking, with the unmistakable demeanor of people who were there to manage a problem rather than seek the truth. "Captain, we've reviewed the data you brought back," the senior officer began, his face carefully neutral. "First, let me say that your survival and return were nothing short of miraculous. You'll be receiving commendations for your actions." I nodded weakly, waiting for him to continue. "However, we have some concerns about your account of the mission." The room seemed to grow colder as he spoke. "The data shows that your flight strayed from its assigned route, penetrating deeper into restricted airspace than authorized. This provocation appears to have triggered the enemy response." I struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain that shot through my body. "That's not what happened," I said, my voice hoarse but firm. "We followed the exact route we were given. We were ambushed. They knew we were coming." The officers exchanged glances, and I realized with growing horror what was happening. They were rewriting the narrative. Thompson and Rodriguez weren't being honored as heroes who died in the line of duty. They were being painted as reckless pilots who caused an international incident. What followed was a week of debriefings that felt more like interrogations. My account was questioned, details picked apart, alternative scenarios suggested. "Perhaps your navigation systems malfunctioned," one officer proposed. "Or maybe the stress of the situation affected your recollection of events." I held firm to my story, but I could see it made no difference. The official record was being written without regard to the truth. When I asked about the video footage I'd captured of the ambush and my wingmen being shot down, I was told it was inconclusive and classified at the highest level. I wouldn't be allowed to see it again. The families of Thompson and Rodriguez were told their loved ones died in a training accident, with no mention of the actual mission or the enemy engagement. I was ordered not to contact them or discuss the true events with anyone, under threat of court-martial. The final insult came when I was informed I would be transferred to a desk job at the Pentagon, ostensibly a promotion, but really a way to keep me under observation and away from operational units where I might share my story. I followed orders and kept silent at first, but the nightmares wouldn't let me rest. Every night, I saw Thompson's aircraft exploding, heard Rodriguez's final transmission cut short. I owed them more than silence. I began collecting evidence, small inconsistencies in the official reports, timestamps that didn't match, communication logs that had been altered. I made contact with a journalist I trusted, someone who understood the significance of what I was sharing and the risks involved. We met in a park in Washington, D.C., far from listening devices and surveillance cameras. "This could end your career," he warned me after I'd laid out the whole story. "I know," I replied. "But 2 good men died out there, and someone set us up. Their families deserve the truth, and the public needs to know." He nodded slowly, tucking my documentation into his jacket. "It won't be easy," he said. "The system protects itself." I thought of Thompson's young son, who would grow up never knowing how bravely his father had fought. I thought of Rodriguez's wife, pregnant with their first child when he deployed. "Some things are worth fighting for," I told him, "even when the odds are impossible." 3 months later, the story broke, not just in one newspaper, but simultaneously across multiple outlets, with my anonymous testimony backed by documents that couldn't be dismissed. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Congressional hearings were called. Investigations were launched. The truth began to emerge, that our mission had been compromised from the start, that information about our flight path had been leaked by someone with high-level access, possibly as part of a larger geopolitical game being played by forces within our own government. I was identified as the whistleblower within days, of course. My military career ended with a dishonorable discharge, my benefits stripped away, my sacrifice and service effectively erased from record. But I regret nothing. Thompson and Rodriguez are now recognized for the heroes they truly were, their families provided with the full benefits and honors they deserved all along. The truth cost me everything I'd worked for, but some prices are worth paying. When people ask me now if I would make the same choice again, flying that mission, surviving against impossible odds, then sacrificing my career to tell the truth, I always give the same answer, in a heartbeat. Because some missions don't end when you touch down on the runway. Some missions continue long after you've left the cockpit behind. And the most important mission of all is making sure that those who gave everything didn't do so in vain.